Chapter 2: Main Street versus Wall Street. Everyone should be able to draw from work the means of providing for his life and that of his family, and of serving the human community. Catechism of the Catholic Church 2428. The political establishment that is trying to stop us is the same group responsible for our disastrous trade deals, massive illegal immigration, and economic and foreign policies that have bled our country dry. The political establishment has brought about the destruction of our factories and our jobs as they flee to Mexico, China, and other countries all around the world. Perhaps no other aspect of his campaign and his presidency captures the genuine love that Donald Trump has for the American people than his approach to the economy and his relentless drive to restore the possibility of prosperity for all of the nation's citizens. As these words are being written, the Democrat House managers are making their case to impeach the president in the United States Senate chambers. In stark juxtaposition, President Trump was just in Davos, Switzerland, telling the World Economic Forum that his prescription of America First is working here and can work for other countries as well, that the global economic construct has favored a global economic elite, the very people he is speaking to, at the expense of the citizens of each and every country. To double down on two overwrought and overused phrases in the same sentence, Trump is speaking truth to power in the belly of the beast, and doing so in his own inimitable way and incredibly successfully. When Donald Trump speaks on the economy and trade and manufacturing, he is truly on home turf, no matter what country he happens to be in at the time. The old adage, "It's the economy, stupid," reportedly coined by Bill Clinton advisor James Carville, coupled with his ability to articulate the problem and solution, was, in fact, the real key to his victory. In places like coal country, where Hillary Clinton had the remarkably bad judgment to talk about her war on coal, in old mill towns in New England, where the opioid crisis is laying waste to the human populations still dwelling amidst the ruins, in the once humming manufacturing centers of the upper Midwest that now are part of the all too accurately named Rust Belt, and among people like those described by Michael Moore, Joe Blow, Billy Bob Blow, all the blows. The fact that the once great middle class of this country has been decimated under both Republican and Democrat administrations over the last few decades, with moments here and there when it seemed they had a fighting chance, made Trump's message of rebuilding the manufacturing base of the country, keeping us out of trade deals that enriched Wall Street at the expense of Main Street, revamping the tax code, and cutting much onerous regulation, gave hope to so many people for whom that virtue has, understandably, been in short supply for many years. One of the most insightful and well-informed commentators on the Trump administration's economic policies and the current drama unfolding in our country goes by the moniker of Sundance and writes at the blog The Last Refuge. Based on various posts made around Christmas and Easter each year by a contributor called Menagerie, one wonders if Sundance himself is not a Catholic. Here he explains in layman's terms how Trump differs from the average American politician of both parties. The strongest argument against the U.S. trade and economic policies of the past 30 years has been the outcome. We don't need to guess what the pros and cons of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce position is. We are living them. We don't need to guess what the Wall Street economy delivers. We are living through them. For the past 30 years, the U.S. has lost jobs. Wages have been depressed, and the middle class has suffered through the implementation of economic trade policy that destroyed the U.S. manufacturing base. None of this is in question. The results stare us in the face. Yet the Wall Street and multinational corporate clubs, U.S. COC chief among them, now demand a continuance of the same. The economic and trade policies of the Trump administration are adverse to those interests. As we have shared for several years, candidate Trump, now President Trump, is an existential threat to the multinational program. Read the first paragraph again. It quite simply states in different words that the establishment has no clothes when it comes to the American economy. The experts of both parties have told us for 30 years and more that the globally oriented trade deals were win-wins, that any high-paying manufacturing or mining jobs could be easily replaced through retraining or by an exciting job in the new service economy, which often in practice meant waiting tables or serving as a customer service representative for $10 an hour. That the shuttering of the factory in your town as production moved to Mexico or China was all part of the glorious process of free trade, a part known as creative destruction. Anyone driving through the former industrial areas of our country could be forgiven for thinking that what we got was a bit heavy on the destruction and a bit lean on the creative. For those old enough to remember the Billy Joel song, Allentown, that told the story pretty well. That told the story pretty well. Give it a listen, perhaps especially if you are not old enough to remember it. It paints a vividly depressing picture of the loss of good steel industry jobs, the resultant growth of a welfare environment, the damage such an environment does to a man's soul, and the havoc it wreaks on families. The economy under which the average American has suffered and seen his standard of living decline in recent decades is a construct against which Donald Trump has waged rhetorical war for 30 years. In short, Donald J. Trump is for the American working class, plain and simple. Yes, he is rich. Yes, he is ostentatious. Yes, he flaunts his wealth, and all that flows from it. Yes, 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 1,000 times yes, and yet he truly loves the working man and woman, as does the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church in the United States was, for many years, the champion of the laboring class, a fact that stood to reason both because the vast majority of ethnic Catholics that came to this country were part of that working class, and because the Catholic Church, through the application of Christ's teaching as expressed in the Church's authentic social doctrine, has, when listened to, served as a leaven in every society in which she is present. A leaven that has always and everywhere served to ameliorate the suffering of the poor, if often imperfectly. Certainly, Catholics well versed in the finer points of that social doctrine can and do disagree as to how best to implement it, or, more accurately, apply its principles in a given society. What is striking to many observers, however, is how, over the years, one of two systems opposed by the Church have come to be embraced by many Catholics. In a kind of diabolical either-or socialism or unrestrained capitalism, or an unhealthy combination of the two in the form of neoliberalism garnished with the worst type of crony capitalism and a vast welfare state, seem to be the choices we are offered by the political establishment. The Church condemns both of the principal flawed systems. Here is how she does so in the Catechism. The Church has rejected the totalitarian and atheistic ideologies associated in modern times with communism or socialism. She has likewise refused to accept, in the practice of capitalism, individualism and the absolute primacy of the law of the marketplace over human labor. Regulating the economy solely by centralized planning perverts the basis of social bonds. Regulating it solely by the law of the marketplace fails social justice, for there are many human needs which cannot be satisfied by the market. Reasonable regulation of the marketplace and economic initiatives, in keeping with a just hierarchy of values and a view to the common good, is to be commended. Full-throated socialism embodied by Bernie Sanders, almost solely on the national scene for a number of years, and now reinforced by the squad of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez et al., is making a comeback in the Democratic Party in response to the globalist free-trading socialist elite managerial state centrist wing of the party, embodied in the last election by Hillary Clinton. Hence, most Catholics who remained in the Democratic Party have been converted over the years to one of these positions. But lest the establishment Republicans, many of whom are, or at least were, never-Trumpers, try to claim the mantle of the exclusive party of Catholic social teaching, they, on the other hand, have gotten away with parodying the global free trade talking points and had been converted to an almost worshipful adulation of the invisible hand. They opposed Trump on the economy every chance they could. They supported the trade deals that gutted the Rust Belt and other places. They would lecture him during the 2016 campaign and later as to why tariffs don't work. Some opposed his nomination for Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, a name you should know, for he is the man who spearheaded negotiations on the greatest trade deals this country has ever seen, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, to replace NAFTA and the China trade deal. Maybe the establishment Republicans were not as smart as they thought they were. To their credit, many have become strong supporters of Trump as they see his policies working in real time. Clearly, Donald Trump is no socialist, though he does, like the church, acknowledge a role for the state in the regulation of the economy. For confirmation of that, one need only take a cursory glance at Appendix 2, which is a list of his accomplishments. Even a passing look at the list would make clear that, as president, Trump is not averse to a role, even a relatively robust one, for the state compared to a liberation position. Those who claim that by slashing regulations, Trump is some type of radical free marketeer are either willfully ignorant or honestly don't realize that regulations which make it impossible for small Main Street businesses to compete with the big boys, or for a vitally needed bridge to be built inside of 10 years, need to be looked at and, quite likely, eliminated. The church is almost always precise in her teachings, such that you can frequently identify a key qualifying word in a sentence. What is the key word in the following passage from the Catechism? Reasonable regulation of the marketplace and economic initiatives, in keeping with a just hierarchy of values and a view to the common good, is to be commended. Give up? One key word, at least with regards to regulation, is reasonable. Trump does not seek to strip away any and all regulations. That he is removing 8, or it is up to 13 now. Trump does not seek to strip away any and all regulations. That he is removing 8, or is it up to 13 now? For every one that is added is indicative of how overregulated our economy was rather than how radical he is. All indications point to an attitude toward regulation that is in keeping with church teaching. He acknowledges a role for the state, but burdensome regulations have hamstrung, if not crippled, many aspects of the economy and the Commonwealth for years. The Trump administration's efforts to remove the burdensome regulations have loosed the reins, and investment is flowing back into the United States. Yes, aided by those pesky tariffs that we were told by the worshippers of the disastrous trade deals of past years would never work. Well, they were wrong. The tariffs are working just fine. The United States has a lot of leverage in its trade negotiations with other countries. Trump, for some reason, is our first politician in many years to actually use that leverage to help the people who elected him. We could continue to unpack this passage from the Catechism, in keeping with a just hierarchy of values and view to the common good. A just hierarchy of values, from a Catholic point of view, would prioritize the ability of families to support themselves rather than be dependent upon the government. That is not the place for an attack on the welfare state, which has arisen, almost as a necessity, one could argue, in response to the gutting of America's manufacturing base and economic wastelands in its inner cities. No, but it is the place to ask if the economy which the establishment has given us has derived from a just hierarchy of values and a view to the common good. Or, rather, has it resulted from an unjust or disordered hierarchy of values and a view to the particular good of some relatively few winners? Wall Street versus Main Street. Call it ironic, if you will, that the champion of Main Street over and against the interest of Wall Street is, perhaps, the most famous billionaire in the world. Again, Sundance. Think about it. Big picture. Donald Trump is focused, intensely focused, on Main Street, not Wall Street. The era of Main Street, middle class, American economics becoming the primary interest of economic policy is right now. This is a fundamental paradigm shift, a conversation about what is the best play for a Main Street corporation, which has direct impact on middle-class jobs. This is exactly what candidate Trump said he was going to do. Don't get caught up in the media obfuscation, accept it for what it is. It is not a simple feat to untangle. It is not a simple feat to untangle the multi-decade web of corporate outsourcing for profit, Wall Street. Many would say it is an impossible task, but we did not elect many. We elected the one man who said that is exactly what he is willing to do. Focus intensely on Main Street economics. There are going to be internal adverse interests who have a vested stake in global manufacturing and production benefits. Those multinational corporate interests are going to be in opposition to national economic interest, and President Trump is going to have to navigate his way through their oppositional efforts while trying to offset any negative impacts to the American people. He goes on to describe how the influence acquired by K Street, lobbyists for special interests that would frequently buy politicians in favorable legislation and often even write it, expanded, and how Trump's Main Street-centric approach is designed to destroy that corrupt model which has been in place for decades to the benefit of the few and the detriment of many. Sundance, in what amounts to a mini course in Maganomics, explains, removal of regulation and empowering full utilization of energy sources is the quick start into the carburetor of the domestic economic engine. Using tax policy to infuse manufacturing and production with capital while making domestic long-term investment the best play for financial return is another aspect. Accelerated depreciation schedules only amplify the investment and return possibilities. The return of the industrial titans will also unleash true business entrepreneurship where innovation and uniquely American skills of product development are national advantages. Americans know how to think independently, often outside the box. Innovation is in our national DNA. We are also blessed to have the natural resources needed to fully develop a renewed manufacturing economy. The underlying architecture and infrastructure is right here in our own backyards. The possibilities are only limited to our own imagination. However, there are adversarial interests, multinational corporations, who remain invested in the American outsourcing model. Together with foreign interests, they will work to undermine any change in the current service-driven, dependency, economic model which they built over the past 30 years. In a later post, Sundance did a deep dive into the details of the effects on the American consumer wrought by the global economic system and examined the expected effects of President Trump's economic program over time. Sneak preview, the end result will be a shift from dependency to independence in terms of both the national economy and the family. His discussion of Social Security in the same post explains the general thrust of the Trump economic plan. To fully understand how Donald Trump views the solvency of Social Security, you must again understand his economic model and how it outlines growth. The issue with Social Security, as viewed by Trump, is more of an issue with receipts and expenditures. If the great U.S. economy is growing by a factor larger than the distribution needed to fulfill its entitlement obligations, then no wholesale change on expenditure is needed. The focus needs to be on continued and successful economic growth. What you will find in all of Donald Trump's positions is a paradigm shift he necessarily understands must take place in order to accomplish the long-term goals for the U.S. citizen as it relates to entitlements or structural benefits. All other candidates are beginning their policy proposals with a fundamentally divergent perception of the U.S. economy. They are working with and retaining the outlook of a U.S. economy based on services, a service-based economic model. While this economic path has been created by decades-old U.S. policy and is ultimately the only historical economic path now taught in school, Trump intends to change the course entirely. Because so many shifts, policy nudges, have taken place in the past several decades, few academics and even fewer mainstream media observers are able to understand how to get off this path and chart a better course. Candidate Trump is proposing less dependence on foreign companies for cheap goods, the cornerstone of a service economy, and a return to a more balanced U.S. larger economic model where the manufacturing and production base can be reestablished and competitive based on American entrepreneurship and innovation. The key words in the prior statement are dependence and balanced. When a nation has an industrial manufacturing balance within the GDP, there is far less dependence on the economic activity in global markets. In a sense, the U.S. can sustain itself, absorb global economic fluctuations, and expand itself or contract itself depending on the free market. When there is no balance, there is no longer a free market. The free market is sacrificed in favor of dependency, whether it's foreign oil or foreign manufacturing. The dependency outcome is essentially the same. Without balance, there is an inherent loss of economic independence and a consequential increase in economic risk. No other economy in the world innovates like the USA. Donald Trump sees this as a key advantage across all industry, including manufacturing and technology. The benefit of cheap overseas labor, which is considered a global market disadvantage for the US, is offset by utilizing innovation and energy independence. The third highest variable cost of goods beyond raw materials first and labor second is energy. If the US energy sector is unleashed and fully developed, the manufacturing price of any given product will allow for global trade competition even with higher US wage prices. In addition, the US has a key strategic advantage with raw manufacturing materials such as iron ore, coal, steel, precious metals, and vast mineral assets which are needed in most new modern era manufacturing. Trump proposes we stop selling these valuable national assets to countries we compete against. They belong to the American people. They should be used for the benefit of American citizens. Period. When you combine full resource development in a modern era with the removal of overburdensome regulatory and compliance systems necessarily filled with enormous bureaucratic cost, Donald Trump proposes we can lower the cost of production and be globally competitive. In a sense, Trump changes the economic paradigm, and we no longer become a dependent nation relying on a service-driven economy. In addition, an unquantifiable benefit comes from investment, where the smart money play to get increased return on investment becomes putting capital into the U.S. economy instead of purchasing foreign stocks. With all the above opportunities in mind, this is how we get on the pathway to rebuilding our national infrastructure. The demand for labor increases, and as a consequence, so too does the U.S. wage rate, which has been stagnant or non-existent for the past 3 decades. As the wage rate increases, and as the economy expands, the governmental dependency model is reshaped and simultaneously receipts to the U.S. Treasury improve. More money into the U.S. Treasury and less dependence on welfare social service programs have a combined exponential impact. You gain $1 and have no need to spend $1. The saved sum is doubled. That is how the SSI and safety net programs are saved under President Trump. When you elevate your economic thinking, you begin to see that all the entitlements or expenditures become more affordable with an economy that is fully functional. As the GDP of the U.S. expands, so does our ability to meet the growing need of the retiring U.S. worker. We stop thinking about how to best divide a limited economic pie and begin thinking about how many more economic pies we can create. Simply put, we begin to make America great again. If you, as a self-described Catholic Democrat, are rabidly pro-abortion, or if the promotion of the LGBTQ agenda and the normalization of things like Drag Queen Story Hour loom large in your list of vital issues to support, you probably don't care that much about all of the above. You will never vote for Trump or anyone like him as long as the Democrats continue to trot out candidates like this year's roster of radicals in their primary. But if you are an old-fashioned Catholic labor or Hispanic Democrat not particularly enthused about the Democratic Party platform with respect to that stuff, if you are a Catholic Democrat because your parents were, and their parents before them, and because the Democrats were once the party of the union and the working man, well then, what do you disagree with in this chapter? Donald Trump is your man. He is fighting for you and your family. The economic results of his first term speak for themselves. A request for the president. Dear Mr. President, your unique brand of Maganomics is reaping great benefits for America's working class, but we would like to hear more mention of support for stay-at-home moms. Mr. President, please consider vocalizing support for the concept of single-income families. We read your economic program as being designed to make that possible, even if unintentionally, but you often tout as a main achievement of your administration the fact that women make up a greater percentage of the workforce than ever before. It is the experience of these two Catholic husbands and fathers that many women across the political spectrum would love to have the option and ability to stay home with their children. You have been able to enact so many family-friendly policies. But what is most often touted are things assuming a model wherein the children are in a daycare. This request is not to denigrate the talents of women nor to underestimate the feminine genius, to use a favorite phrase of Pope St. John Paul II, but rather to celebrate and support the mothers among them in their most important role, that of mom. Some women may take umbrage at this idea, but we doubt that any mothers will, or children for that matter. Family life is the key to so many societal indicators of success, and mothers in the home are a societal good not to be underestimated. Please, Mr. President, take that under advisement. We know this is a cultural issue, and that the great American economy you are unleashing will reap many short and long-term benefits. But know that there are many, many women out there who would love, we mean love, to leave the cubicle behind and be home with their children, at least when they are young.